For decades, they denied everything. The U.S. government dismissed sightings of unidentified flying objects as hoaxes, weather balloons, misidentifications.
I told the Air Force I wouldn't tell anybody. He said, you're probably better off without knowing.
But behind closed doors, military pilots were capturing encounters they couldn't explain.
My God! Look at that thing, dude!
Objects with no wings, no visible propulsion, moving faster than any known aircraft.
Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that.
These weren't just rumors. They were real, and they were recorded.
It's rotating.
In recent years, the Pentagon has released a series of videos captured by the U.S. military. Videos that defy explanation. What you're about to see has been declassified, but it hasn't been explained. These are the Pentagon UFO tapes.
Okay, Mr. Elizondo, you state in your testimony that, quote, advanced technologies not by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe, end quote. If these technologies are not made by any government, who's making them? Private companies, or are you implying they are crafted by a non-human intelligence?
Well, ma'am, that's precisely why we're here. The problem is that, temporally speaking, over decades, not just the last 10 years, to put this in perspective,
are these private companies you're implying, or is this non-human intelligence?
It may be both.
Okay.
When it comes to Blue Force Technologies, I would not be able to discuss
okay.
that.
Are you read into secret UAP crash retrieval programs?
We would have to have a conversation in a closed session, ma'am. I signed documentation 3 years ago that restricts my ability to discuss specifically crash retrievals. I submitted for my book through the DOPSR process, which took a year for it to be reviewed. And what is in the book is what I was told I'm allowed to talk about.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Were they designed to identify and reverse engineer alien craft, yes or no?
Yes.
The connection between the U.S. government and UFO secrecy didn't start with leaked footage or congressional hearings. It began almost 80 years ago, in a quiet ranching town in New Mexico, when something fell from the sky and was quickly covered up.
I was not out at the ranch at the time, and I picked up an Albuquerque paper, and here's my Dad's picture looking at me, and I thought, well, I wonder what he's done now. And I kept asking him questions, and he said, I told the Air Force I wouldn't tell anybody. He said, you're probably better off without knowing.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer.
Mac Brazel tended his herd as he always had, surrounded by miles of empty desert. But after a fierce storm rolled through the night before, the land felt different. Scattered across the sand was something unusual, something that didn't belong. It wasn't like anything he'd ever seen.
Anyway, they swore Dad to secrecy, and I went out to the ranch and stayed until he got back, and I asked him what he got into, and he says, I found a bunch of trash.
Did a UFO really crash in the middle of the night? And if it wasn't a UFO, what was it? And is the government covering up the story of the century?
On July 2nd, this rancher, Mac Brazel, saw something crash in a field outside town. Brazel died in 1963, having kept a pledge to the Air Force to keep secret the story of what really happened in this field. Brazel talked to only one person about those events, his son, Bill, now 60 years old.
There was a bad thunderstorm the night before. The next day, he was out on the ranch, and he found this debris. So he went on to tell me it was a bunch of sticks, and twine string, he says. And he said on some of these sticks, why, there was, he says, Japanese or Chinese figures, you know.
In the hot New Mexico desert, something crashed, leaving a father and son perplexed. Clues were found in the wreckage.
The wood, I call it wood, I don't know what it was. It was something like balsa wood, but it wouldn't burn, and I couldn't cut it with my knife. It was kind of like balsa wood. It was real light, kind of a neutral color. And pieces of string were something like monofilament fishing line. And then the foil, like tin foil or lead foil, but you couldn't crease it and make it stay. And I only had one little jagged piece of it. And you bend it over, make a crease, and it'd straighten right back out. And it wouldn't, I don't know, it had to hit with a terrific force because you couldn't cut that wood or the string or the foil.
Only 22 years old at the time, Bill could not help but be intrigued by his dad's discovery of the strange materials in this field. He searched for and found some remnants of the crashed object.
And I was talking about it. I went into Corona and I was sitting there in a beer joint, and of course, my friends was asking me if I'd found any more or anything like this. And I said, well, I'd picked up a few scraps. About a cigar box full, and somebody, I don't know, must have informed the Air Force, because first thing I know, I have visitors, and they say they'd like to have this material. And they didn't tell me they'd confiscate it, they just said, well, like we're gonna have it one way or the other, you know.
Coming up, the military scrambles to erase all trace of what crashed in the desert outside Roswell in 1947, triggering nearly 80 years of UFO secrecy. But today, declassified footage from inside the Pentagon is raising new questions. Who or what is flying in our airspace? And what do they want? Before the break, we met Mac Brazel, a quiet rancher living on the outskirts of Roswell, New Mexico. As he approached the debris field, the mystery deepened. What he was about to uncover on his ranch would draw the attention of the United States military.
And he said on some of these sticks, why, there was, he says, Japanese or Chinese figures, you know. And, of course, he couldn't even start to show me. And I kept asking him questions, and he said, I told the Air Force I wouldn't tell anybody. He said, you're probably better off without knowing.
The Air Force quickly pursued the wreckage, sending Jesse Marcel to investigate. Marcel believed the wreckage was extraterrestrial, but the Air Force had an explanation of their own.
Balloons can move very strangely, especially high up. When the wind is very strong, they can change direction suddenly. They float in ways that, the style of movement is different than an aircraft. You can see a pocket of the gas inside, and then it trails the polyethylene or whatever film makes it up, almost like a jellyfish with a kind of head and then trailing tentacles underneath. It makes them look weird.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris, Moscow are key targets. The whole world is under attack. Can it survive?
Weird came to life in 1947 when debris, somewhat resembling a flying saucer, was recovered by a rancher in Roswell, New Mexico. The Army Air Force press officer was quick to claim it, denying press and public speculation that alien forces were about.
And we've always honored accredited media when they want to investigate a given specific sighting.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
So he called in reporters, permitted them to take pictures of the debris, and said, well, folks, sorry, there's been a mistake. It wasn't a flying disc, it was a weather balloon. What people didn't realize at the time, well, it was a weather balloon, but it wasn't for a weather mission.
The now identified flying object was part of a top-secret mission called Project Mogul, an effort to launch high-altitude balloons carrying the equipment to monitor sound waves and possible nuclear detonations. At the time, though, that mission stayed under wraps, fueling the Roswell alien story and others.
Ultimately, if you want to put people up there, you've got to get them down safely. So you start with the dummies.
Skydive was a balloon mission using crash dummies to test parachutes from high altitudes. The project originated at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico.
Today, we're very familiar with crash test dummies, but back then the people of the era were not. And so there are cases of civilians coming across a crash site in the desert and there's body parts everywhere and people screaming, oh, he's dead, he's dead. And it's a dummy. When a crew would recover one of these crash dummies, one thing that they often did was to zip it into a sealed bag because they didn't want the ground to contaminate the findings from the upper atmosphere. So to some people who were not familiar with crash test dummies and thought that they were bodies, they read these as body bags. And if they see gray skin, then suddenly people start to think that they're zipping up these alien gray-skinned creatures for dissection in a lab somewhere. And they're really studies on dummies.
Not everyone accepted the balloon story, and some witnesses claimed they saw more than debris. W. Glenn Dennis, a local mortician, claimed he received a call from the base. What followed was a story that would ripple through history.
Really, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base, inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed.
Bodies had been recovered, not human bodies. The military was doing everything it could to keep it quiet.
There was another officer said, hey, wait a minute, you did not see any crash, there was not any crash. And he said, you get the hell out of here and you didn't see anything and you don't talk to anybody. He said, you're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble. And I said, look, I'm a civilian, there ain't a damn thing you can do to me about it. He said, no, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand. That's when he made the remark there.
Whether or not you believe Glenn Dennis or Jesse Marcel, or the dozens of others who came forward, one thing is clear. The U.S. government has kept its UFO secrets locked behind closed doors for over 75 years.
My God. Look at that thing, dude.
Coming up, a bombshell release of 3 previously classified videos shocks the world. In 1947, a rancher discovered strange debris in the desert. The military offered an explanation, but not everyone believed it.
It was something like balsa wood, but it wouldn't burn, and I couldn't cut it with my knife.
In the decades that followed, witnesses came forward, and the rumors never went away.
And he said, you get the hell out of here and you didn't see anything and you don't talk to anybody.
But in 2017, the rumors became reality. The New York Times broke a story that confirmed what many suspected. the U.S. government never stopped tracking UFOs.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My God. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. It is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like anything, it's rotating.
In 2015, U.S. Navy pilots flying off the East Coast encountered something they'd never seen before. An object appeared on their infrared tracking system, flying against the wind, at high altitude, and without any visible propulsion.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
The pilots locked on. What you're watching is known as the Gimbal incident, named for the way the object appears to rotate mid-flight. Listen carefully to the pilot's voice.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My God. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. It is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like anything, it's rotating.
There's a whole fleet of them. Notice the orientation of the craft. It tilts unnaturally against the airflow. There's no wing structure, no tail, no rotor. Yet somehow, it moves like it's alive. Military analysts would later confirm. The object was cold, meaning it was likely not powered by jet propulsion, and it left no exhaust plume visible in the infrared spectrum. This object was traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. No transponder, no heat signature, no explanation. In the cockpit, trained Navy officers couldn't identify what they were seeing. And this wasn't a one-time glitch. According to the Pentagon, multiple naval aircraft tracked this object across multiple days. So what was it? A foreign adversary? A physics-defying drone? Or something else entirely? Whatever it wasn't ours. And that was enough to raise alarms all the way to the Pentagon.
One thing, object on the Roger. There's troubleshooting as soon as did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that. Look at that.
For nearly a century, they were mocked. Pilots, farmers, police officers, ordinary people who saw something they couldn't explain and refused to stay silent. They were called hoaxers, fantasists, conspiracy theorists. But in 2015, over the open ocean, the U.S. military saw something too. This is Go Fast, captured by a Navy FA-18 Super Hornet using a forward-looking infrared system. That tiny dot racing across the ocean. It's not a seagull. It's not a drone. It's a high-speed, unidentified object. And the military doesn't know what it is. Watch it again. It skims just above the surface of the water. Fast, silent, low. The object is moving at hundreds of miles per hour with no visible means of propulsion. There are no wings, no rotor wash, no exhaust, just a blur, slicing through the air in perfect silence. For decades, believers said this was possible. that craft were visiting our skies, that the government was seeing it, but not showing it. The military didn't want to talk about it. But here it is, released by the Department of Defense, an object moving with capabilities no aircraft on Earth can match. For the skeptics, it's just a blur. But for those who've watched the skies for a lifetime, who've faced ridicule and disbelief and silence, this is validation. The question isn't whether they exist. The question now is, what else are we not being shown?
Greetings, Chairwoman Mace, Chairman Grothman, Ranking Members Connolly and Garcia, and members of the committee. It is my honor and privilege to testify before you on the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomenon, formerly known as UFOs. On behalf of our brave men and women in uniform and across the intelligence community, as well as my fellow Americans who have awaited this day, thank you for your leadership on this important matter. Let me be clear. UAP are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the U.S. is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries. I believe we are in the midst of a multi-decade secretive arms race, one funded by misallocated taxpayer dollars and hidden from our elected representatives and oversight bodies. For many years, I was entrusted with protecting some of our nation's most sensitive programs. In my last position, I managed a special access program on behalf of the White House and the National Security Council. As such, I appreciate the need to protect certain sensitive intelligence and military information. I consider my oath to protect secrets as sacred, and I will always put the safety of the American people first. With that said, I also understand the consequences of excessive secrecy and stovepiping. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the aftermath of 9/11, which many of us remember all too well. I believe that America's greatness depends on three elements. A watchful Congress, B, a responsive executive branch, and C, an informed public. Over the last decade and a half, I learned that certain UAP programs were and are operating without any of these elements. Although much of my government work on the UAP subject still remains classified, excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos. Over the last decade and a half, I learned that certain UAP programs were and are operating without any of these elements. Although much of my government work on the UAP subject still remains classified, excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos. A small cadre within our own government involved in the UAP topic has created a culture of suppression and intimidation that I've personally been victim to, along with many of my former colleagues. This includes unwarranted criminal investigations, harassment, and efforts to destroy one's credibility. Most Americans would be shocked to learn that the Pentagon's very own Public Affairs Office openly employs a professional psychological operations officer as the singular point of contact for any UAP-related inquiries from citizens and the media. This is unacceptable. Many of my former colleagues and I have provided classified testimony to both the Department of Defense and the Intelligence Community Inspector General. Many of us have subsequently been targeted by this cabal with threats to our careers, our security clearances, and even our lives.
How would you characterize UAPs?
An enigma, sir, and a frustration. We're talking about technologies that can outperform anything we have in our inventory. And if this was an adversarial technology, this would be an intelligence failure eclipsing that of 9/11 by an order of magnitude.
Are there classified Department of Defense materials related to UAPs that you believe could be safely disclosed to the public without compromising national security?
Yes, sir, I do. I would never, ever try to endorse providing some sort of information that could compromise what we call a blue force technology or capability. But I do believe there's a lot of information regarding this topic, and I've been very vocal about it, that should be shared not only with the public, but most importantly, with members of Congress.
Are you familiar with my friend David Grush?
Absolutely, sir. I had the privilege and honor of working with him myself several years ago at U.S. Space Force.
Last year, as you know, he testified that the U.S. has run a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Are there UAP programs operating without proper congressional oversight?
100%.
November 2004, U.S. Navy pilots from the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group are on a routine training mission. But what they're about to encounter is anything but routine. They call it Tic Tac, a white, oval-shaped craft with impossible speed, no wings, no engines, no heat signature. It drops from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than 1 second. Commander David Fravor, the pilot who tracked it, said it outmaneuvered America's most advanced fighter jets. Like they were standing still. The craft jammed their radar. It accelerated with no visible propulsion, and it didn't fly like anything on Earth. When the Pentagon finally declassified this footage, it confirmed what many suspected. The military isn't just seeing unidentified objects. They're chasing technology beyond anything we understand. In October 2017, an infrared sensor at Al-Taqadum Air Base in Iraq recorded 17 minutes of video showing a strange drifting object. Military analysts later reviewed the footage, concluding it was nothing more than a cluster of partially inflated balloons. But for many who study these tapes, the explanation feels incomplete.
In this report, Mr. Elizondo, for reference, several types of allegedly alien craft or possibly alien craft or unknown aerial phenomena, what we used to call UFOs, are described. Spheres and orbs, discs and saucers, oval or tic-tac, triangular shape, boomerang and arrowhead, and irregular or organic. Mr. Elizondo, does that summarize to you the types of craft that we're discussing today?
Sir, that is a general morphology, historically speaking, of many UAP.
So those descriptions are very different craft. Is it your assessment that they would come of different origins?
It's possible, but it also could be in sense a matter of utility. And let me just state for the record, I never read the report that or the article that Mr. Schellenberger put out. The reason
That's a good point. We're just referencing it.
Yes, sir.
For descriptive purposes for the American people.
Mr. Elizondo, to your knowledge, can you name the country and around time frame that the first back-engineered UAP program started?
Ma'am, unfortunately, I would not be able to have that conversation in public.
Can anyone on the panel name that? None of you? Okay. Mr. Elizondo, in regards to these aircraft being piloted by whatever they might be, non-human biologics, would you agree that it's likely that they are being piloted by some mind-body connection?
Ma'am, I think it is safe to presume here that they are being intelligently controlled because some cases seem to anticipate our maneuvers, and in other cases they seem to, I came across an email where the word stalked was used in a very secure email between Navy officers discussing their ships being pursued by a UAP.
Coming up.
I was abducted by a reptilian group, and I was brought out onto this pontoon where I was taken up onto a craft.
bad thunderstorm the night before. The next day he was out on the ranch and he found this debris. And he said on some of these sticks, why there was, he says, Japanese or Chinese figures, you know.
What started with a crash in the New Mexico desert evolved into decades of belief that the government knew more than they admitted. But now, recently declassified military footage long kept secret within our government may be turning the tide. If these objects are intelligent, what do they want with us?
My first conscious memory is 3 years old. And I remember waking up and I was laying on this table and there were these grey faces all around me, big eyes, and they projected this image that they were owls. So to me they looked like owls. But just underneath this I could see the big black eyes. And they were all looking down at me, but I was being wheeled down a corridor. And I remember feeling absolutely terrified. I just couldn't comprehend what was happening to me and why these strange faces had taken me away from my home, away from my parents. There was nothing familiar around me. And I just remember this terror, and it's never ever left me. And then I black out and I remember nothing more from that experience, but that was my very first realization.
Across the world, thousands report abductions and encounters with humanoid beings, similar to those described in the Roswell crash. Are they what is piloting these unknown objects seen globally?
So these were the very grey Zeta type people that started my experiences in life. And I was probably around 3-4 years old. And I woke up and my curtains had been opened and my bedroom was on the second floor. So there was quite a bit of height between the floor and my bedroom window. And there was this grey hovering outside my bedroom window, staring in at me, communicating with me telepathically. And I was like, what? How's this even possible? And the same fear, the same terror, because I think from this very first experience, I was already terrified. The trauma had already been put there. So any subsequent experiences, I was just instant fear when I saw them. But the memory of that happening is etched right there in my mind. So I decided to draw a picture of it. My window was directly in front of me and the curtains had been opened. And this person was hovering there. And they projected a very non-menacing image of themselves.
Have gray human-like aliens been visiting our planet for decades? And has the proof been in front of us all along? From Roswell to current day, the stories match.
And on that particular night, we just went to bed as usual. I woke up at some point in the night and I knew they were there. It was just this knowing that I just felt, okay, I'm going. They've come to take me. I got the tone in my ear. I saw the lights in the room. And then the paralysis came over me. And I tried to turn to alert Tom and to say something to him. And that's how I knew I was paralyzed, because I couldn't move and I couldn't talk. It was just, I just couldn't get it out. And then I don't remember anything more. I blacked out at that point, and the only memory I seem to have of that abduction is being in the craft, flying upwards, vertically, not like a plane, but just going up like this. And I remember seeing the ground underneath me getting smaller and smaller, and I was aware that we were flying over Bristol in the UK, because at Bristol city centre there's this like a Ferris wheel, and we flew over it. And I recognised it. I remember looking at an interface screen. There were screens all around me. And I was looking at one screen. My handler, who I recognised, who had come to collect me, was sitting right there talking to me, and I was aware that there were a few others of them around me, maybe 3 or 4 others, several male beings and 1 female, and we communicated telepathically. And I was aware of when they were telepathically talking to each other, because I could sense their minds talking to one another. And this is all I remember about the experience.
The beings on that spacecraft, he relates, were not anything that he could identify from our planet. They did not appear like any human being he'd ever see, but they were obviously not anything else. So they obviously were living human beings, and some of them were injured, most of them were dead. They were taken by he and a number of other individuals to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base at that particular point in time.
On April 25, 2013, a U.S. Customs and Border Protection aircraft was preparing to land at Rafael Hernandez Airport in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. As it scanned the coastline with an infrared camera, it captured something extraordinary. A small, fast-moving object skimmed over the ocean, then cut inland, slipping effortlessly between airspace and water. At one point, it appeared to split into 2 separate objects before vanishing beneath the waves without a splash. Analysts later reviewed the footage, some suggesting it was a stray balloon or a drone. But its speed, flight path, and the moment it entered the water defied easy explanation. To believers, the Aguadilla video is one of the clearest pieces of evidence that something unknown is operating in our skies and our seas. For skeptics, the Aguadilla footage could be a trick of the camera, a misidentified drone, or even a flock of birds mistaken for a single craft. But for those who've studied the video frame by frame, the details are hard to dismiss. The way it moves against the wind, the way it vanishes beneath the ocean's surface without slowing down, and the most haunting question of all: if it isn't ours, then whose is it? The Aguadilla encounter has become a touchstone for modern UFO research, forcing us to look beyond the skies and into the depths below. And it wouldn't be the last time military cameras captured something they couldn't explain. What you've just seen in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, remains one of the most credible modern UFO cases ever captured. It wasn't a rumor passed through generations or a grainy amateur video. It was a government-owned thermal camera, unblinking, unbiased, recording an object defying known technology. It slipped beneath the ocean surface without a splash. It reemerged seconds later, and then it vanished without a trace.
The only memory I seem to have of that abduction is being in the craft, flying upwards, vertically, not like a plane, but just going up like this. And I remember seeing the ground underneath me getting smaller and smaller.
From the windswept desert of Roswell to secret government programs to eyewitness accounts that span decades, the puzzle is the same.
And I kept asking him questions, and he said, I told the Air Force I wouldn't tell anybody. He said, you're probably better off without knowing.
When we gather the evidence, when we listen to the witnesses, the question grows louder. Who or what is really in control of the skies above us?
There was a bad thunderstorm the night before, and the next day he was out on the ranch and he found this debris. So he went on to tell me it was a bunch of sticks, twine string, he says. And he said on some of these sticks, why, there was, he says, Japanese or Chinese figures, you know.
Across these stories, the patterns repeat. Strange craft, mysterious visitors, sudden silence, official denial. And when the truth does surface, it's often decades too late, after files have been buried, witnesses forgotten, and the public distracted by the next crisis. The declassified Roswell reports dismissed the wreckage as nothing more than a weather balloon, but buried in those same files are contradictions, notes that hint at technology far beyond what we had in 1947. And the Aguadilla craft? Quietly acknowledged as unidentified by those who filmed it, but ignored by the agencies sworn to investigate. So what do these cases really tell us? That we're not being told the whole story, that someone, somewhere, knows more. And maybe the biggest question isn't whether UFOs are real, but why the truth has been hidden for so long. If these phenomena are a threat, why aren't we preparing for them? And if they're not, what does that say about the intelligence behind them? Technology beyond our understanding, appearing and disappearing at will, breaking the laws of physics as we know them. Are these visitors explorers, observers, or are they something much closer to home?
How would you characterize UAPs?
An enigma, sir, and a frustration. We're talking about technologies that can outperform anything we have in our inventory. And if this was an adversarial technology, this would be an intelligence failure eclipsing that of 9/11 by an order of magnitude.
Are there classified Department of Defense materials related to UAPs that you believe could be safely disclosed to the public without compromising national security?
Yes, sir, I do. I would never, ever try to endorse providing some sort of information that could compromise what we call a blue force technology or capability. But I do believe there's a lot of information regarding this topic, and I've been very vocal about it, that should be shared not only with the public, but most importantly, with members of Congress.
Are you familiar with my friend David Grush?
Absolutely, sir. I had the privilege and honor of working with him myself several years ago at U.S. Space Force.
Last year, as you know, he testified that the U.S. has run a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Are there UAP programs operating without proper congressional oversight?
100%.
Anyway, they swore dead to secrecy. And I went out to the ranch and stayed until he got back. And I asked him what he'd got into, and he says, I found a bunch of trash.
Did a UFO really crash in the middle of the night? And if it wasn't a UFO, what was it? And is the government covering up the story of the century?
On July 2nd, this rancher, Mac Brazel, saw something crash in a field outside town. Brazel died in 1963, having kept a pledge to the Air Force to keep secret the story of what really happened in this field. Brazel talked to only one person about those events, his son, Bill, now 60 years old.
Maybe the real story isn't about what crashed in Roswell, or what flew over Puerto Rico, or what abductees have whispered about for decades. Maybe the story is that we're being shown just enough to keep looking up, just enough to never stop asking questions, just enough to wonder if we were ever alone at all. The answers are out there, but until they come, all we can do is keep searching.